You know, when we're kids, our brains are highly adaptable, right? And then as we get older, that adaptability starts going down, down, down. But what happens if we have chronic stress in our life? That can really plummet the adaptability of our brain. So today we're really going to talk about how stress affects the brain and what we can do to reverse it, so we can actually rewire our brain. Let's dive right in. Here's the deal. Our body is always in this communication loop with our brain, right? Like what's going on in the body affects the brain, and the brain sends signals back to the body. So for example, let's say you eat some delicious food. That information gets sent to the brain, and your brain says, "Oh, you ate food? Let's be happy." Or let's say you feel threatened by something and your brain goes into fight or flight. When we have chronic stress, here's what's happening. You're under attack over and over and over again. So the brain is constantly sending out these signals, and it starts to affect the actual physical structure of the brain. This guy right here, called Bruce McEwen, he did a ton of research on this. He's neuroendocrinitis. Basically what he did is he looked at how stress affects the brain and how it changes the structure of the brain. In his studies, he used these adorable little monkeys. Like, look at them. They're so cute. But what he was looking at was how stress affected their brain. What he found is when you're under chronic stress, it shrinks the hippocampus, which is a part of the brain that helps with memory, but it also helps with turning off the stress response. So when you're under chronic stress, it actually makes it harder for you to turn off the stress response. That's interesting, right? You would think that the more stress you have, the better you would get at handling the stress. But it doesn't work that way. So it actually makes it worse. It also affects the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is all about planning and thinking and reasoning and social behavior. In other words, it's basically the CEO of the brain. When that's affected, we can't make good decisions. We start acting out. So when someone's under chronic stress, you might see them lashing out. You might see them being impulsive. They might start drinking too much or taking drugs or doing things they would unnormally do because that prefrontal cortex just doesn't work well. The amygdala is another part of the brain that's affected by stress. And this is the part of the brain that's involved with processing emotions, especially fear and anxiety. So when there's chronic stress, the amygdala gets enlarged. So instead of shrinking like the hippocampus, it actually grows. And what happens is it starts to make those connections in the brain stronger between the perception of threat and the response of fear. So now the brain starts perceiving more things as threatening and we become more fearful. Chronic stress also affects the nucleus accumbens. This is the part of the brain that's involved with motivation and reward. And what happens is it starts to shrink. So when we're motivated by things externally, when we're under chronic stress, we don't have that drive. We're not motivated. And this is why people who are under chronic stress tend to have low achievement. They don't get stuff done. Lastly, it affects the insula, which is all about self-awareness and empathy. So we lose that sense of who we are and we lose our empathy. So those are the parts of the brain that get affected by chronic stress. Now, the good news is that we can actually reverse this. We can wire our brain to be more resilient to stress. So what can we do? The first thing is sleep. Sleep helps restore those regions that were affected by stress. In other words, when you're sleep deprived, it's almost like adding more stress to your life. So if you can add sleep, it will help reverse this effect of stress. Another way is eating a healthy diet. So eating sugar and refined foods and things like that actually make things worse. So eating healthy fats, omega-3, segundos fiber, good proteins, fruits, vegetables, will actually help improve the situation. Also, fasting and intermittent fasting has been shown to actually reverse some of this damage that has been done by stress, so that can be helpful. Another big one is exercise. Exercise actually reverses all of this damage by increasing BD, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which basically helps grow new brain cells and reverses all this damage from stress. So exercise is extremely powerful. Another one is reducing toxins in the environment. So having toxic relationships, living in a toxic environment, even having toxins in your home like from cleaning chemicals, those things don't help. Reducing those things in your environment can be very, very powerful. Next up is meditation and mindfulness. So learning how to calm your mind, right? Because most of the stress we have is in our mind. It's not necessarily in our environment. It's how we perceive the environment. So if we learn to change that perception, it can be very, very helpful. And this is why I love doing this work, because through hypnosis, through visualization, you can actually change the perception of the mind, making it so that you're not in that constant state of stress. The next one is giving yourself positive experiences. So this is it's important to journal and write down the good things that happen in your day. Have gratitude. Gratitude is a huge one. There's tons of research on that. It's a big reversal tool for stress. The next one is engaging in activities that are meaningful to you. This is why it's important to find your purpose, your passion, right? Find the thing that's really meaningful to you and engage in that regularly, consistently, because that will help pull you out of that stress state. Next up is connecting with other people. Social support is very, very powerful. So when you're going through a stressful time, reach out to friends, family, your community, and that can help you pull out of that stress. And the last one is realize that you don't need to control everything. And this is where philosophy can be very, very useful. Stoicism, for example, can be very helpful. Even things like Buddhism can be helpful. Learning how to accept things that are outside of your control. Because most things are outside of our control. We think we can control everything. But when we learn to let go of that, letting go of that perfectionism, letting go of that need to control everything, that can be very, very freeing. And that can help reverse some of the damage from stress. I hope this video was helpful. If it was, please subscribe. I make videos on how to use your mind to create your reality. I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.